Next thing is Tim Hayes discussed the historic preservation.
Tim Hayes, One Schoolhouse Island. This will be short. Some time ago, the town council authorized me to form a group to investigate adopting a historic preservation ordinance and the benefits of that in the town of Yankeetown. Shortly thereafter, Inglis, sort of following our lead, did the same thing. We have been waiting until the people from the state who are in charge of overseeing the process, and it's necessary to go through them to have an effective historic preservation ordinance and an effective certified historic organization, for them to get through the pandemic where they could travel down here and meet with us and give us a presentation both about the process and to answer questions about the benefits and the potential detriments. They have freed up. They will be in Inglis Town Hall Thursday the 6th at 10 in the morning. Wednesday. Well, hopefully I remember and I show up there. I tried to get them to do an evening meeting because so many people work, but that just doesn't work in their schedule, and frankly it took so long to get them to free up to come down here. So we're doing it Wednesday at 10 in the morning, and my concept of this is to do two things. One is to answer everybody's questions who can show up, and I hope you do, about what the benefits of this potentially are and what the detriments are. And I get a lot of feedback from people that, no, we don't want a historic preservation ordinance. They're going to tell us what they can do with our property. They're going to tell us that, if we have a flood, that we can't replace the inside unless we can find period consistent siding, et cetera, et cetera. I think they will tell you, and one of the reasons I've been waiting for them is I don't want anybody to take my word on this. I'm not an expert on historic preservation other than what I have talked to them about, but I think they will tell you that no, that is not the case. That no, you don't have to adopt an ordinance to qualify that gives the town the ability to tell people their property is historic. You can do that, but you don't have to. You don't have to restrict what people do with the interior of their house. You can do that, you don't have to. To me, the potential benefit of this ordinance is that we, particularly in Yankeetown, compared to Inglis, are tremendously hampered by the 50% rule. And if you are a qualified historic structure, the 50% rule doesn't apply to you. And even if you're not a historic structure, but you're an existing structure that you're making changes to, being a qualified historic structure can give you, if you're not in a flood zone, can give you some benefits from complying with current code requirements. And the example I give is we have houses along Riverside Drive. If you love Yankeetown, you have to, I don't think any of us think we wouldn't like to keep these old houses, wood frame houses, small little houses on Riverside Drive the way they are. Well, they're all in flood zones now. And if they get flooded out, the 50% rule says you cannot spend more than 50% of the value of that structure on renovation or rehabilitation without bringing it up to code, which means lifting it up in the air 5 or 6 or 8 feet, whatever the flood zone is. And you look at an old house like Corby Feeney's old house down there, the property appraiser had that structure valued at $20,000. So if that had been flooded out and they wanted to rehabilitate that, and it's not a particularly special house, but it's absolutely quintessential what makes Yankeetown. It's those little wood frame houses. You couldn't rebuild it. $10,000 won't allow you to put a new roof on it. So the whole point of this is to try to give people, if they want to be a historic structure and they qualify, the flexibility to preserve what they have rather than one day we all wake up and we've had a big flood and what we're left with is houses 12 feet up in the air that look like mobile homes on stilts. And so that's the purpose of this. And again, I would appreciate anyone who can make it to ask the questions, come ask the questions of the experts to understand if there are risks to us that I don't see, but what the benefits are and what the potential risks are. So, Wednesday at 10 in the morning at English Town Hall.
And who is actually presenting?
The gentleman, I should have written his name down, Ruben Acosta, who is the head of the Certified Local Government Program, basically, and then he has a woman, a coordinator, who is coming down, whose name escapes me. But they are the people who, when a town decides they want to adopt a historic preservation ordinance, and the way it works is you really get no benefit from a historic preservation ordinance unless you qualify under the state program, which means the National Park Service also has to approve your program. So they are the people who can shepherd you through that process and tell you, here's what your ordinance, here's the criteria you have to have, here's what you can do. Now the good news is if you look at the historic preservation ordinances in Florida that have been adopted, they're very generic cookie cutter, because the idea is to come up with an ordinance that you can get the state to approve and you can get the Park Service to approve. But within that being a cookie cutter, the key is the criteria for what your community considers a historic structure. And you have a great deal of flexibility in adopting criteria that are specific to your town and what makes Yankeetown Yankeetown. So while the general rule of thumb is to be a historic structure you have to be 50 years old or older, there are places where they go, we have these mobile home parks that are old Florida style mobile home parks. Most people don't care for old mobile home parks, but you've seen them in Palm Beach and places that are kind of quintessential what makes the community. These old places still exist. You can preserve those kind of things if the community chooses to do it. So that'll be, if we decide to move forward, that'll be the interesting thing, is how the town defines and describes what it wants to say.
Or the town doesn't need to do anything, the homeowner can do it all themselves.
Not really. You first have to have the ordinance in place. Can't do anything without an ordinance in place unless you can get yourself on the historic register. Because what the codes say, both the 50% rule and the code for existing buildings, the building code for existing buildings, they have all sorts of exemptions for historic buildings. But they say to be a historic building, you either have to be on the National Register, you have to be recognized by the National Park Service or something, or you have to be designated by a certified local government. And the only way in Florida to be a certified local government is to go through this process of adopting an ordinance, getting the state to say, yes, that meets the requirements, getting the National Park Service to approve it. Now, I talked to the state about that last part because everybody's afraid of the federal government, and they basically said, look, if you use one of our templates, the National Park Service is going to approve it, and then they never really have anything to do with you again. Mm-hmm. We're going to send them a report every year that you have the required number of public meetings, that kind of stuff. Federal government's out of it at that point. It's very much local driven as to criteria, and then the state is there to make sure that you perform all the technical requirements every year.
And are the ordinances permitted to be permissive or mandatory? In other words, I think there are towns where there's a historic ordinance, and I'm not sure if they're for it even, where if you are in a certain area of the town, you are a historic structure, you have no say in it.
You could adopt an ordinance like that. What I think they are going to tell us, and what my interpretation of what they've told me before is that you can adopt an ordinance where The only way a structure can be designated historic is if the owner of it asks for it to be designated as historic. And in fact, Mr. Acosta, when I first talked to him, told me that that's the state's preference now, because they've had problems, if you read the newspaper, in St. Pete, for example, where neighbors go in and petition to have their next door neighbor's house determined to be historic. And that just creates a huge disaster. So I think what they will tell us is, no, you can have an ordinance where nobody can make your home historic except you. Now, once you make it historic, you got to live with the repercussions of that. But I can certainly foresee circumstances where if you own one of these little houses on Riverside Drive that flooded out, you can't rebuild it because of the 50% rule. Your choice is either I'm going to bulldoze it and build something 15 feet up in the air, or I'm going to declare myself historic, be able to rebuild it back, and thereafter, I'm not going to be able to change the exterior appearance of it. It's going to have to look like it's always looked. I can certainly see circumstances where people would happily accept that alternative.
The way you just said it, it would sound like you could wait till your home was flooded out to request this historic designation. Is that true?
A question that you should ask on Wednesday, but I believe the answer is yes. And the way to think about it, I think, is this, is it seems a little unfair that somebody could sit there and not declare their home historic until they really needed it and decide now's the time to do it. But the point of these ordinances is to save those old houses. And if that's what it takes, is to give people the chance to do it when they need it, and we want to save those old houses, then I don't think there's anything that prevents us from doing it that way. And frankly, I'm not sure how many people in this town would buy in until they saw that they needed it.
I know in the past, if it's an old house and you wait till the last minute to do it, the evaluation of you wanting your house to be historic after that process has happened, it got flooded out and stuff, gets really, really tough to get it done.
So what I think the answer to that is part and parcel. Before you ever can adopt this ordinance, you have to do a survey of the town's assets. And you go through, and what you do is, I can see that we designate most of Riverside Drive as a potential historic district. And within that, you then designate various structures as what they call contributing structures.
Right.
This is a structure we would like to see saved. This is a structure we would like to see saved. Once we've done that, I think they qualify.
That's right.
They have to get designated contributing. They can't, I think you're right, once the flood comes, if we haven't said that we're saving, they can't come in and say, hey, we want to be historic.
Right.
But I think there is a process where we can, you could say we're kind of having our cake and eating it too, but you have to always remember the fact that the federal government recognizes that if you have a designated historic structure, it's not subject to the FEMA 50% rule, is because they put value on saving those structures. And if we can come up with a way that will facilitate saving what makes this community special, I think we have a lot more flexibility than a lot of us might have thought.
Is there any other questions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wednesday.
Right?